Hey everyone. So I'm still getting ready, however. We'll get started here in just a minute. For those of you who have joined, feel free to, if you have the ability to or the desire to, drop in the chat, say hello. Let me know who you guys are so I can say hello back. But regardless, I'm just putting on a standard streamer hook. This is, nothing special. This is, specifically I'm putting on a 1/0. But I think in the description I talked about using a size 4 B10s. And that's because we use a size 4 B10s for seemingly almost every single thing that we tie. And it works. I just wanted to use something a little bit larger because it's going to show up on the camera a little bit easier. And then, give me a little bit more room to kind of show you as I go through things. But you can use any hook that you have. And if you've got, a standard streamer hook, great. And if you want to use a longer shank hook, that's fine too. Deceivers are something that you really can change the body shape depending on how you want it to make it look and what you want to imitate. So give me one more second. I just wanted to grab just a couple of things. So I want you. Getting everything that I need ready. And hopefully everyone's day is going well. Everyone's staying safe and most importantly, staying sane. I know that's easier said than done these days. I'm going to try to tie 2 of these tonight. We're going to tie the first one kind of similar to, a little bit different than the one that was in the thumbnail. I'm going to try to tie this one basically chartreuse, but show you, again, a weighted fly and show you how to kind of change the coloration. So, we're used to with standards Lefty Deceiver. So those tuning in who may not have read the description, we're tying a Lefty's Deceiver tonight. And many of us should be familiar with that pattern. It's a pretty venerable pattern. And there's tons of different tutorials out there on how to tie it. But what we're going to do is show you a couple of things that I've learned along the way and I've experimented with to kind of make this pattern a little bit different and what I call tying it in an advanced style. We're going to tie it weighted. We're going to put on a UV epoxy head. But again, if you don't have UV epoxy, don't worry. You can just use your regular head cement or really anything. Or you skip that step. And then we aren't going to tie bucktail in the way that we normally do. We will do that. We'll Lefty's Deceiver usually has bucktail off the tail. We'll do that. And then it usually has typically 2 colors on the front of it. You'll have one color for the top and one color for the bottom, and those are tied at the same length. And we'll have those elements in, but then we're also going to add some other colors to kind of change up the pattern and show you how you can better imitate other types of fish. So let's get right into it and get some thread onto our hook. So I'm going to be tying with red thread tonight. I'm going to do that for a couple of reasons. One, it should show up on the camera a little bit better, hopefully. And the other reason is I actually really like that it provides almost like a hot spot where the head will be that red color. And I don't know. I don't know if that catches fish more or just catches the fisherman, but it's something that I've always liked. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and lay my thread down, and I want to thread base all the way from the front. So I'm going to start up at the eye, and I'm going to work all the way back to where that hook bend just starts. I'm going to cut my tag end off along the way. And on most hooks, you'll find this corresponds very close to where that barb is. I know I've talked about that before, but for this particular type of hook, and actually the B10s as well, which this isn't, that bend actually starts to occur before you get to that barb. So just be aware, whatever hook that you're tying on, might be a little bit different. So the next part that I want to do is, actually it's fine right where it is. We're going to go ahead and tie in some bucktail, and then we'll go ahead and tie in flash. So we're going to do kind of a classic coloration on and just show you how we can spruce up a little bit, your classic deceiver. And the classic deceiver is a chartreuse over white. So again, when you hear something said as blank over blank, what we're referring to is whatever the orientation of the hook when it's being fished. Now, a deceiver doesn't invert the hook. So what we mean by inverting the hook is where we have the hook where the hook point rides up. And you remember we did that like with that bonefish fly, that little shrimp fly, because the dumbbell eyes, it would actually ride hook point up. And so that is a very sharp hook point. All right. So the deceiver rides hook point down. And so chartreuse over white is going to be where the chartreuse bucktail is going to be on the top, and then the white is going to be on the bottom. But we're going to change it up a little bit and have some fun along the way. So what we are going to do first is cut off a small section of bucktail. So let's talk about this. We are not going to put on as much bucktail as you normally would if I was just tying a classic deceiver, where I'm just going to have two overall colors. And the reason for that is I'm going to be putting more material on this fly than normal, and that is going to result in a bulkier fly unless we use less material. And so it's important that we don't end up, see, it's kind of interesting, right? If you go into a fly shop and you take a look at the flies, a lot of those flies will have lots of material on them. And that's great, and they look fantastic. But to me, I don't think they fish as well. And I think that they block the natural movement of the material when it's too bulky. And so I like to tie my flies more sparse, so fewer material being better. It also makes it a lot easier to cast as well, so it has that benefit. So don't, basically what we're going to do is we're going to say, oh, okay, I think this is about the material that I want, but tonight we're going to try to take about half that. So, as you go through this, when you eyeball amount of material, say, yeah, I think this is right. Try it tonight where you say, okay, that's the amount of material I think I need. Let me take less, and then see what the fly looks like in the end. You might be surprised. It might actually look really nice. Or, maybe you were on point and it'll be a little bit too sparse, but even then it'll still fish just fine. So I have just a small little wisp of bucktail, and I'm pulling out the shorts. And that makes it even smaller. And on a deceiver, typically I do about 2 times the length of the hook shank for my tail. You can go longer or shorter, and it really depends upon the amount of length of a fly you're trying to make, right? So you think back to when Jeff did the half and half. The half and half is supposed to be a deceiver back end with a clouser front end. It's a little bit different, as you'll see, but Jeff really made a fly that was 3, 4, 5 inches long by having a real long tail on it. We're not going to do that with the deceiver. We're going to have it being a little bit shorter. I'm looking for a fly that's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 3 inches in length. That's a good length for a bait fish. And so I'm going to say, okay, the bulk of my material is right about here. And so I measure once along the hook shank, and there's my second length. So now I know, okay, that's about how much I want sticking off the back end. And I'm going to go ahead and do 2 loose wraps. And I'm doing 2 loose wraps because it's enough to kind of hold the material in place, but it's not cinched down so that I can push. See how I did that? I took my thumb on top and I pushed down. What that results, let me put another, before I let go of this, let me put another wrap or 2 on. So you can see on the camera here that I've got that white bucktail coming down along the hook shank. As I turn it, you'll notice I've got bucktail pretty much 360. I mean, obviously you can't have it go through the hook shank itself, but it's as close to 360 as I can get it. It's because I took that bundle and I pushed down on my thumb. It pushes that hair and allows it to conform 360 around that hook shank. It's also the reason why I didn't trim my butt ends. So you know, if you've ever watched any of me tie before, I'll usually measure and then I'll cut and then I'll tie it on. If I were to do that and push down, it's very, very easy to end up having it where some of those butt ends will not get captured correctly, and then you have a whole bunch of material that gets pulled out. So this way, we've ensured that we can really cinch down, and then I'll go ahead and I'll grab all of these butt ends, kind of pull them back, cut as close to the hook shank as I can. That also cuts them at an angle, by the way, and it allows you to really taper down. So we're going to try to avoid building up bulk back here as well. We're going to have a little bit of bulk, but that's okay. But we're trying to avoid, so we're trying not to use too much thread wrapping and get away with what we can. So the next thing that we need to put in is flash. So we put in our bucktail. Typically this is going to be the same color that we're going to have for our underwing or our underbody. That's usually the lighter color if you have a multicolored scheme. And then now we're going to put on some flash. And for fun, I'm going to use Krennic, but you can use any flash. You know, you can use Flashaboo, you can use, usually I would use a crystal flash or a crinkle flash, but I happen to have a whole bunch of Krennic sitting right here, so I'm going to use it. Oh, so this is my Krennic bag. Just a little bit of organization, a little tip. Everything I have is in Ziploc bags, right? So, you know, if I go and say, oh, I really need my bugger hackle, I'll just grab a Ziploc bag and then I have all of my bugger hackle inside of it. That makes my life so much easier, you know, as you start to accumulate material. And then, of course, when we get to bucktail, we can really just spend a whole day. And let me know, you know, give a comment if you just want to see the way that, you know, different fly tyers will set up, you know, their fly tying bench and storage and material management and things like that. If that's something that would be of value to you, we can, you know, spend a part of a live stream or a whole live stream on it. But yeah, for my bucktail, I have it in a little Tupperware bin, and it works really well for me. I'm sure Jeff is probably laughing because he has more than just one little bin. He's got considerably more than I do. So, all right, let's get back into my flash. I am going to use a clear flash just because I want something that's going to shine, but I'm going to have enough color in this fly, so I'm not going to worry about adding extra color with flash. You can put literally any color that you want. One of the things that I've done that I really like the look of, I'm just not going to in this fly, maybe we'll do it in the next one, is using a really dark flash. By using a dark flash, you can mimic that lateral line, but we're not going to do that. We're just going to add some sparkle to the fly without adding too terribly much. So we're going to take 3 strands. Now my flash is relatively long, but I'm just going to double it over so I get a total of 6. Again, not a ton of material here. You know, this isn't acrylic, so I don't need, you know, massive amounts of flash. Just enough that a little bit of shine will happen when this fly moves through the water. So because I'm going to be putting on flash, I'm going to put it up on top. I'm not worried about running it along the side. I'm going to advance my thread up slightly, take my thread, fold it around. So you see that? I've actually folded the thread or the flash around the thread, and this allows me to pull the thread down. It pulls that flash right into place, and I can just hold this flash up and work my thread back, and now that flash will never be able to be pulled out. It'll break long before it ever gets pulled out. I'm just gonna not worry about trimming this yet. I'm gonna trim that flash after I put on my hackle tail, which is the next step. So for this fly, we are going to go ahead and use, I'm going to use a nice grizzly chartreuse hackle. Again, you can use whatever you want. You know, if you just want to use white hackle feathers because that's what you have, go ahead. You know, kind of make this your own. But I want to stick with this kind of chartreuse color theme. The traditional fly, you know, was tied with just solid white hackle feathers off the back. But I'm going to be playing with this pattern a little bit, you know, kind of mimicking, kind of like maybe a little white perch, or not white perch, sorry, yellow perch, or potentially a little baby bass. But there's a lot of green coloration in bait fish, and so I'm going to play with that today. So I'm going to try to find two feathers that are relatively similar size in both their thickness and length, and pull those off. And if you end up investing in hackle, you know, this is very nice hackle. I happen to tie enough flies that I said, yeah, let me treat myself. And I happen to tie enough in chartreuse. They said, let me go ahead and invest in the chartreuse. There's nothing wrong with the smaller hackle packs. In fact, that's where the majority of all of my hackles invested in. But in order to be able to really see the lengths of these, just bend it. And as you go through, you'll see them kind of separate out. Makes it really easy to be able to find hackle of the same size. So just a little tip of how to deal with that type of material. Okay, so I've got my two hackle feathers here, and I don't want them to splay out, right? So when Jeff tied his half and half, he had his hackle feathers so that they splayed outwards. When we tied that deer hair frog the other week, we did the same thing. So instead of having them where they're going to splay out, I want them to stay together. So where they're really going to be a cohesive tail. Now, to do this, we're going to do it a little differently than the way I normally tie my hackle. So in the past, you've always seen me measure, then trim, then cut the little barb and little comb and put it on. The issue with that is that this tail won't be long enough to where we can crush the stem well, and so it'll roll. So very much like what Jeff did when he did the half and half, that was a really good technique. You know, if you guys haven't seen that video, I strongly urge you to go and watch it. We're going to go ahead and put the feather on whole, and as we tie in place, we're going to hold it so it doesn't move, but it'll actually stay in that orientation. You'll see what I mean here in just a second. But I'm also going to help these stay in place a little bit too by leveraging a little bit of super glue. So not required, but man, does it really make laying hackle that much easier. So I'm going to go ahead and separate out these two feathers because I want them laying along the side. I'm going to tie them in together, and I want them to come at about the same length as that bucktail. So I'm place one feather on, hold that kind of in place, the other feather in place, make sure, double check my length, that looks good, go in and hold them in place, and we're going to do two loose wraps. And the reason why we're doing that is I can let go of the feathers. They're not going to fall off the hook, but then I can look around that hook shank and make sure that those feathers are laying in the orientation I want them to. See how they're nice and straight? So I say, okay, yeah, that's right. So I'm going to come back in, hold down the feathers, and advance my thread forward. And now I'll go ahead and bring my thread back, right back to that original tie-in point. And if you need to do any adjustment, now's the time, especially before any super glue dries, if you use any super glue. But they should be in a pretty good orientation. See, that's still laying just like I want. A lot of people will struggle with the Lefty Deceiver where their hackle feathers will end up kind of flipping over. So rather than where they're wide and then thin, they would be real wide up on the top of the hook shank. So if you struggle with that, try to tie them in the way that I just showed you, and see if it works for you. You know, I've seen many different ways in how hackle is set in, but that way works really well for me. All right, so we now have our tail in place, so I can take my flash and I'm going to cut it just behind where the tail ends. So the tail ends right here, and I'm going to cut it just behind there. And so now the back half of the fly is done, and I can advance my thread and just clean up a little bit. Now I want to stop right here. So you'll see a natural point when you tie in. Typically, and this is how it is for me, I'll finish tying in the tail just in front of the hook point. See, I'm about a millimeter in front of the hook point on this hook. And there's a little bit of a thread bump. Let me grab my bodkin, make it easier. There's a little bit of a thread bump that comes down. And, you know, I have it tied in with a nice natural ramp. That, by the way, happens to coincide with a really nice part of the hook shank to put in weight. So I'm going to tie this Deceiver weighted. The original, you know, pattern that Lefty created was an unweighted fly, and of course, you know, he tied them weighted and unweighted and every which way under the sun. But I like to weight all of my Deceivers, but I don't like to weight them heavy. What I want to do is weight them just enough that they will easily go underneath the surface film. But I don't want them to dive nose down. I want them to come down as level as possible. And so tying in from right here, just in front of the hook point, to almost up to where you would tie, where the end of dumbbell eyes would be on like a clouser, is putting that weight right in the center of this hook, and that's where the bulk of the weight of the fly is. And it'll result in a fly that's fairly neutral in the way that it will sink. And it allows you to almost fish it like a suspended bait. So that's what we're going to aim for here. And that's been very effective for me. So, by the way, if you have any questions, feel free to put it into the chat. You know, I haven't seen any on the chat, so, you know, hopefully that's working right for me. I apologize if I haven't seen any. So, oh, nope, there it is. I see a bunch now. Sorry about that, guys. Let me go through and make sure there's any questions. Nope. Just Jeff noticing that I got my finger pretty good on that hook. It has healed. So sorry that I missed that chat, guys. I don't know why my little screen off to the side didn't update, but it looks like it's updating now. So if you have any questions, you know, feel free to reach out. And hey, Stu, and hey, Steve. Glad to see you guys on. So let me talk about what I'm doing while I'm doing it. Sorry, let me take this back off. I got distracted by technology. So what I'm doing is I'm putting just a section of the wire. By the way, this is lead-free 0.025 round wire. You can use lead wire. Don't use as much lead wire. Just use you know, fewer wraps. So the lead-free is not as heavy, but I like it because, you know, I'm trying to reduce the amount of lead that I leverage. I think it's, you know, I don't know, it's my preference. So after I put it up, I'm just wrapping it around as much as I can. And then I'm going to leverage one of my favorite tools. It's my debarred pliers that I use for so much more. Just to pinch and flatten down that little end of the wire. And then I'm going to hold that in place with my fingers. So you can't see, but I'm pinching the wire as tight as I can. And I'm going to go ahead and place some wraps around this hook shank. If you get a gap like I just did, just push them together. And I'm just going to keep wrapping forward. And it results in, depending on your hook shank, I'm going to stop there. So this is a size 1/0 of this particular type of hook. About 8 wraps around. And then I'm just going to simply pinch and break off that wire. And obviously this wire is soft enough that I can get away with doing that. So, but yeah, if you have a smaller hook, you know, you may want to use less wraps or use a thinner diameter of lead-free wire. But, you know, notice that the wire is staying in the very center of the hook and is not being placed too far forward or too far back. That's how we get that neutrally buoyant fly, or not neutrally buoyant, but where it's neutral in that orientation when it sinks. Sinks nice and level. So again, debarred pliers coming up into the front, because when you break off wire, that's going to be hard to see on this camera. No, it's really hard. Okay, there it is. You might just be able to make that out. There's a little piece of wire sticking up. That can catch thread, that can break thread, and it's a pain and it's snaggy. So if you use your debarred pliers, you can smooth that out. If you don't have debarred pliers, you know, again, I've shown this in the past. You can use, you know, if you get scissors with the flat ends, and I've also used hackle pliers quite a good bit as well to do this very thing. All right, so now we have to secure in our wire. And the way I do that is I'll take my thread and I'll come at an extreme angle. So rather than wrapping forward like this, because what'll end up happening, I'll show you. If I try to wrap this way, it's going to start separating the thread and separating the wire. So instead, I'm going to come at an extreme angle and kind of crisscross my way through. Hang on. See, this is why you don't do what I did before, but I did it because I wanted to show you guys. It separates your thread out and kind of becomes a pain. So now I need to fix it. Okay. So if I kind of come at extreme angles, forward and back, what this does is it results in the thread wrapping over top of the wire. And that results in a better base. So now I can come forward with my thread and really help to cover it up. You don't need to cover all of it with your thread if you don't want to. I just chose to do so. But yeah. I like that because I know that kind of weight isn't going to come undone easily on me. You know, it's up to you, your preference. Another thing that you can do here at this step, because we're about ready to start working on tying in the head. So if I were tying multiple flies, this might be a good stopping point. And then what I could do is come in with a head cement and put it over all these wraps. And why would we do that? If I were fishing in the saltwater with this fly, and I was, a lot of saltwater fish have teeth. They will hit in the center of the fly and they will start ripping the thread out. And so that's where my deceivers will start to fail over time, is that actually the thread itself will be destroyed and then the fly will start to unravel. So a little bit of head cement here will make this a much more durable fly. But if you're fishing in freshwater, that's not very common to have fish with teeth. You know, even bass over time, they have that sandpaper mouth. You know, they can abrade things. But I'm not going to worry about it tonight. But that is definitely a good tip. If you want to make a fly more durable, you know, with this fly pattern, you know, go ahead and put that head cement in and either wait for it to dry or tie it off, put on the head cement, and start on your next fly. And by the time you get to this point, that other fly will have dried, and you can alternate that way. All right, so back to it. We are going to now start working on the head of our fly. And this is going to be done first in a very traditional manner to how a deceiver is tied. So we're going to tie in the light color, the belly color first, and I'm going to use white for it. I'm going to cheat, by the way, or not cheat. I'm take full advantage of my rotary vise, and I'm going to invert the hook so that when I tie this in, it's a lot easier for me to see where my material is going. And the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to grab some bucktail, and I'm going to take what I think is enough and take about half of it, because again, we're trying to tie this sparse so we don't end up with a ton of bulk. And so I have, maybe a quarter of a pencil in diameter at best. Cut it off. Grab, so the way I clean my bucktail too, if you're not familiar with this, so you should be at this point, I have my butt ends pinched, pull my fingers forward, up about 3/4 or halfway, and it allows me to separate out all those short fibers. Because all those short fibers do is add bulk. They don't add to that length, and so we don't really want to deal with them. All right, so now I've got my my bundle, and what I'm looking for right now, and this is the same thing if this was just a regular deceiver that we weren't going to be adding other color to, is I want this to where it comes down maybe 3/4 of the total length. Some people will actually tie it where it comes down the full length. I like 3/4. I like the tail from the hackle to stick out a little bit beyond. So I've got my length down, and so I'm going to go ahead, it's marked, grab it with my left hand, and now I can trim. So a little different than the way that we did the tail. This way is the way that I will usually do it, where I'll actually take the full amount, mark it, trim it, and then go ahead and tie it in. By the way, notice here that I have this bucktail going up at an angle. I'm not tying it in flat. I'm tying it at an angle. And the reason why we do this, and we talked about this before, I got a couple fibers trying to get loose on me because I'm giving a demonstration. Let me retrim. Is when you tie in at an angle, the fibers will stay more at that angle. They won't be as flat, so you get a fly with more volume. All right, so I'm pulling my thread tension on the upstroke, putting just a couple of wraps in, and then kind of grabbing that bundle to make sure that it's not pulling around that hook. And now I can go ahead and secure the rest. And that's enough. I'm going to end up putting more thread wraps on, but I'm going to do that as I'm building. If you're not careful, the head of your fly can get really, really large and very, very thick from all the thread wraps that we're going to be putting in as we put the various colors on that we're going to do. So the next thing that we're going to do, by the way, notice that bucktail is really sticking up. Even if I come in and I separate it around that hook shank, it's still wanting to stay at an angle. That's how, again, we can get volume on our fly without having to put in bulk of material. All right, so let me flip the fly back over to where it's at the correct orientation, and we're going to go ahead and put in our top color, which is our chartreuse. Now, traditionally, we would just put in, and I've seen it tied two ways. I've seen it where you grab a bunch and then you kind of push down to where it wraps all around the hook except for the bottom. And I've also seen where you tie in three parts. So I would take a bundle of chartreuse, tie it on the side, tie it on the other side, and then tie it on top. And that builds that 3/4 of the way around the hook without covering your material. But we are not going to tie with just this color. In fact, we're going to tie with at least 2 other colors on this fly. And so I do not want to take a ton of this this chartreuse bucktail, or I will have way too much material up front. So instead, I'm going to try to grab maybe twice the amount that I had on the white. So a little bit more material that we use for the underbody. I want about twice that amount. So again, separate out the butt ends. So we just, you can get all the shorts out. So we have just the longer fibers. And I want this to be the same length as the white underneath. And the way that we're going to tie this, you can do this 2 ways. You can tie this in smaller bundles if this is too difficult, but I'm going to show you how I like to do it. So I've got the length I want. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to trim. Come in, put 1 wrap down. I'm not putting a ton of tension. Put a 2nd wrap down with a little bit more tension and let it sit. And now I'm going to come in and put my finger underneath, my thumb on top, and just kind of push it. And what this is doing is I'm pinching the bucktail. And this is forcing the bucktail down around the hook. Remember how we went in the back and we just pushed down and went all the way around the hook shank? Well, I got my finger underneath of it. So that bucktail can't go underneath the hook, which is where our white is. And so it's being forced down along the sides, but still some up top. So most of the bucktail is along the side of the fly, but some of it is up top. And that's going to give us the coverage, but also give us some room because we're going to put a top color here in just a second. Now, it's important to remember that my thread wraps at this point are loose. So if I'm not careful, this is going to spin on me. So now I want to go ahead and bring my hand back and really clamp down tight on that hair and pull up. Wrap with a lot more tension now, because now we have to make up for the fact that so much of those thread wraps were put in very loosely. And then I'm going to go ahead and wrap back. But I'm going to stop. Normally I would put a lot more wraps in, but I know I want to put in 2 more colors of bucktail. And so I don't want to put too much in because I want to try to keep this head as small as possible so it doesn't get too large. So notice I now have pretty good coverage around this hook shank already. And if I need to manipulate, now's the time. I can come in. You see me use a bodkin a lot just to separate out deer hair and just to make sure that things are in place. And you still can manipulate and push it around. And by the way, this is a very fishable fly right now. If I were to tie this off, you know, if I wasn't talking and demonstrating, I could have tied this in, what, about 5 minutes, maybe 10. And this would be very passable as a deceiver and would catch a ton of fish. But we're going to have fun with it. We're going to, you know, make this a little bit more razzle-dazzle or what have you. So I'm going into my box o'hare, and I'm going to pull out a darker color chartreuse or green, because as a minnow, as you go up towards the top, it gets darker, and so I'm going to try to mimic that. And I'm going to do that. So I could go with a regular solid green, and that would look just fine. But I'm actually going to go with a more muted. So this is a pastel olive. And even though it isn't a dark green, because it's a more muted color, it'll be fun onto the on the top. And so let's go ahead, pull this out and grab a bundle. And we're not going to put a lot of this on. We're going to put just a small amount, just enough that it changes the top of the fly, but not so much that it overpowers our chartreuse, because that really is the bulk of our coloration. So I've got less than what I had for the white. Then I'm going to put up on top. All right, separate out all the short ones and make it the same length or a little longer. I'm actually going to make it a little bit longer so that it overlaps that tail and comes down just a bit. And mark the length I want. Okay, come in and cut it. Place it on top. And start wrapping again, top tension. Be careful, because if you're pulling on the downstroke, you'll actually pull these fibers down. Now's a great time to come in and manipulate them if you need to. Just enough wraps to get it in place. I don't even have it where I've got all that material covered, because again, I'm trying to reduce bulk as I tie this. Okay, so now I kind of have that kind of highlight color on top. So now we're going to do a cheek color. And my favorite color to do that with is red. This is, I think, a lot of fun to kind of put in on that fly. So let me double check to make sure my chat's working. Sorry about the lag on it. Just want to make sure, because I know it wasn't working before. Okay, it looks like it's working just fine. Make sure I'm not missing any questions. You guys are very quiet tonight. All right. So for the cheek color, we are not going to tie where it comes all the way down. We're not going to do that because it's going to completely cover up the green if we do. Instead, we are going to aim to tie just a little bit where it comes maybe back at the length of the hook shank or less. Now, when you tie with that, it actually changes, right? So you see here, there's, let me put it to where you can see, like just up there. Just a small little wisp. But if you look at that same bundle down by the base, there's a lot more material. So I'm now measuring based upon the amount that is at the tip versus the diameter at the base. So it's a little different. This takes some getting used to. And what I'm looking for is just enough where it's going to cover the entire side, but not so much that it adds tons and tons of bulk. So the other thing that we need to do is, again, we're going to go in here, we're going to take out our short fibers. But we also need to make sure that most of the bucktail is in alignment on the tips. This is actually a pretty good bundle, but the way you do that is you come forward and grab the real long ones and you come back in, and this is like hand stacking to get them the right length. This is how you can build an orientation and a profile. I've done this before, by the way, where I've gone through and hand stacked to where the fibers go from short to long to give you, I don't know if you're familiar with like a New England style. So Jeff's asking if I could use hackle for a cheek instead of bucktail. You could. And so on bigger flies, and I'll have one near me, I'll actually use schloppen and wrap it around, and then I get a complete 360 with it, and that looks really nice as well. But yeah, if you wanted to use hackle, you totally could. I just happen to like the look of bucktail. Another way that you could do it is, so I'll use this, where you would have a contrasting hackle feather, and you would just put it in just a small amount as well, and that will look really nice. And that's a good suggestion, Jeff. You know, it's obviously not one that I'm doing on this live stream, but you know, many people do. So what I'm doing is just oriented where my tips go no longer than the hook shank in the back. Kind of pinch that down. put in about 3 loose wraps, re-grab that bundle, because this will want to separate on you. And this is really hard to do on camera, by the way. So bear with me. I almost cut my thread. Come in, trim it out, put another couple of wraps, come back. And that's how I put that one on. And you notice it's not on top, it's only on the side. And so I'm going to show you again. So I'm going to invert my hook so you can see. And I'm going to come in, let's clean this up a little bit. I got hair everywhere now. Yeah, Jeff, maybe for the second one, I'll show that technique with a contrasting color. And we'll tie the second one a lot faster than we're tying this first one. So just making sure I have enough, measuring off the tips. I felt a disturbance in the fly tying community, Jeff, when I almost cut my thread. I know you saw that, but I recovered and didn't do it. Okay. So have my bundle. I'll do the same thing. Find the really long ones, pull them out, and restack them in to kind of build a more uniform tip profile. Put it on to where they're only about as long as the, say, still too long. There we go. It's only coming back to about where the hook shank, where the hook bend is. Grab those. Put on about 3 loose wraps, just enough to hold it in place. Manipulate as needed. And then not cut my thread, but cut off that bucktail. This, by the way, will almost act like a gill plate. It really adds a lot, I think, to the fly. Okay, so now we have this kind of neat, hot spot, cool red coloration inside the fly. We're almost done. This is, obviously a lot more work than, a normal guide fly style deceiver. But I think this actually makes a difference. I do. Jeff may or may not agree with me. He obviously ties on the more sparse side. One, I fish this with way more confidence when I put the time in when I tie my deceiver like this. And two, I really think these accent colors make a difference for certain predator species. Bass, it may or may not make a difference. If you just throw something in front of a bass and you move it, they'll generally hit it. But other species really tend to key in on color. And, it's funny. Like sea trout are pretty easy to catch. But at the same time, I've seen it where they're so finicky that if it ain't chartreuse, it ain't no use. But even then, I've thrown 2 different deceivers. One all chartreuse and other with accent colors, and they go for the accent color every time. It might just be me, it might just be I'm fishing with more confidence, but I think taking the time to do this really is something that's going to be worthwhile for you. All right, so we are going to use, so now we're ready. So in a traditional deceiver, we would put, you know what, I'll do that for this one. The next one I'll do the other way. But I want you to see both ways to do this. I just have to find it. I'm looking for my, but you know what? I was looking for my peacock pearl, my actual bag of it, and I couldn't find it. But then I remembered that I had an actual piece of peacock that I found, or someone found, and so I'm gonna use it. for the sake of ease. So I'm going to grab a bundle and strip it off. Right off the stem. That's fun. I'm not grabbing a ton. So this is, I don't know what, this is about 6 pieces of peacock curl. If you do not have peacock curl, use flash. In fact, most of my deceivers are not tied with peacock curl. They are tied with flash. I think flash is more durable than peacock curl. And you can really have a lot of fun with it. And what I would recommend is get the darkest flash that you have and put it on top. And I'll do that for the second one, and I'll tie the second one a lot faster than this. But I do want to show peacock curl because I want to show how I tie in and then transform the peacock curl in a really fun way. So what I want to do is make sure that this herl is longer or as long as that top color that I put on. And for this, I'm just going to put 2 wraps on, and then I'll trim. And by the way, I'm not trimming to my tie-in point. I'm just trimming so that I can secure it down. And now I'm going to go ahead and start cleaning up the head of my fly to trap all the material in place. Remember before, we were only putting enough wraps to secure each one in place. We weren't trying to completely cover up the material on every step. Otherwise, we'd have a massive head of our fly. I mean, it's already pretty large, but don't worry, we're gonna make it look pretty. But yeah. So this herl now is sticking straight back like this, right? That's kind of interesting, but not very realistic. And peacock curl doesn't move the same way, so a lot of the stuff will flatten down, but that herl won't flatten quite as well. And what I want to do is I want to curl it so it forms more of a natural curve. And to do that, take your peacock curl and very carefully, don't break your herl when you do this. But now that it's secured in place, I can come in with my scissors and just run the scissors underneath. This is like curling a ribbon, if you've ever seen that done when you're gift wrapping. And it's easier if you do it in sections than try to do the whole thing all at once. See how that's starting to bend? And you have to do it more in the front than you do in the back because this is thicker. But now I've got something that kind of curls down that body. I really like that look. I think that's really cool, you know, and it really, especially when it gets wet and it gets, it really conforms. So anyway, that's how I like to tie in peacock curl. All right, now we're now ready to finish up our thread. But before we do so, I want to put eyes on this fly. And so again, I've got a round, so this will be really good. You'll be able to see the difference that this is going to make. So to get rid of that round shape and get ready to put on eyes, I'm going to come in and I'm going to flatten my thread. Now I'm not squeezing real hard, just enough to take that round shape down to a flatter cone. And again, I use my debarb pliers for this, but you can use the flat side, flat back part of your scissors. After I do that, I always put an extra wrap or 2 in because you will shift materials. So you don't want your materials to get loose. So, oh, thank you, John. Yeah, John said he uses his bodkin, and you know, obviously that's not as sharp, and he said that worked just fine. So I'll try that in the future. That's a good tip. See, I'm learning on this as well. Okay, now that I've got my thread flattened, I'm going to go ahead and put in just a 4-turn whip. You can finish off the fly any which way that you want. Pull that nice and tight and trim it off. We're ready to put on some sticky eyes, I think, if I can find any. Huh. I'll be right back. I'm back. I just saw Stu's comment about using a curling iron. I want a video of that, Stu. I want to see that. I want to see you use a curling iron to curl it. That would be hilarious. So, all right. I've got sticky eyes. Totally, this part is just for fun. But, you know, do it however you'd like. And by the way, if you just put some head cement on this just to make this more durable and fish this is going to fish extremely well. But we're going to add that extra flair on it. So, top of my fly has this nice dark orientation, just like it should. But the head of the fly doesn't. You can leave it this way if you want and just have a nice red hot spot. Or if you take a Sharpie and you run it along the top. And by the way, Sharpie bleeds through thread. So I'm doing light touches and stopping. I'm not letting that Sharpie sit on and stay on. Now I have something that looks like it goes all the way to the front. And I'm actually going to add in, for emphasis, a little bit more. And I'm doing this slowly, where I'm not trying to do it all at once, with light touches, because again, it'll run down that thread if you're not careful. All right, so now that I've done that, I'm going to put the eyes over top of it. Pull off the little sticky eyes. Stick them in place. There's one. And I don't care what they say on the packaging. I have never found sticky eyes that will actually stick in place and not come undone. So be very careful because they just do not have a strong enough adhesive. So now I'll put the second one on my side. All right. My fingers are too fat. I have to use the bodkin. So if you struggle, get the eye on a bodkin, get it in place, and then pinch it on. That'll help set it. Until you go to move it slightly and it falls off. Oh, this is fun. We might have to sacrifice this eye and get another one. I think that one's not sticky at all. Yep. I'm done with that one. I'm getting on to another one. Not dealing with that. Yeah, Jeff is having flashbacks. Sticky eyes. They're awesome and also a menace. All right, so they're in place. But obviously they are not secure. And so the best way to secure eyes in place and to really finish off a deceiver, in my opinion, is to use UV glue. And not everyone obviously has UV glue, but it is something that is worth, if you really get into fly tying and you really get into fly tying streamers, it's something I would recommend you investing in. It just makes certain types of fly tying easier, and it really does a good job for finishing off a head. So we're just going to build up a small amount around the eyes, right behind the sticky. I'm not worried about placing all of it down. I just want enough so that when I zap this with light, those eyes get locked in place so I can't accidentally knock them off. And so work the air out of this. There we go. So you can barely see this, but it's just enough where it's kind of sitting in between. So I'm going to grab my UV light. get it in place and make it so that I get it directed. I try to block it so it doesn't actually set the UV glue sitting on my desk. And I'm only putting it on enough so that it'll set these eyes so that they're not going to come undone. That's good enough. And now I can go through and really build up the rest of this. So this is thick, loon thick. Everyone has their own preference on their UV glue that they use. I think it all works well. It's whatever you're comfortable with. Now I'm using a thick instead of a thin because I am trying to build up the head of this fly. Thin is going to kind of absorb and lay down more. But I actually want to build a little dome. So you can see how that dome is starting. Now it runs a little bit. So I'm actually going to flip it upside down and come in. Start to set that in place, flip it back up, set it the rest of it so I can see what I'm doing. Hold this in here for a little bit. If you had a like a proper light, like this is a hey, go into hotel and see whether or not you feel comfortable enough sleeping in it light. It takes a little bit longer to set, but this was no cheapo. One day I'll break down and I'll get one of the because I tie with loon, I'll get a loon light. What those expensive lights do is that they're designed to put out the exact wavelength that the specific formula that they use or make reacts to. That's all it is. So it's going to put out more wattage, and it's designed for curing their compound. Works extremely well, but the El Cheapo lights just put out a wide range at a lower power. So they will work on every formula out there, but they won't be able to set it as quickly, and they'll always be a little bit tacky afterwards. And I think Jeff talked about this last time. So I'm putting on enough for the bottom, come up, let this set just a minute or two, and then after this, I'll do my trick of putting on the head cement, and then I don't have to worry about them being tacky. Then at that point, everything is going to be nice and solid and hard, and it'll be set. So just another couple of seconds here, okay. And I like to put a thin amount over top of the actual eyes. Makes the eyes look more realistic, gives them more depth. Hey Steve, thank you. Have a nice day, and thanks for joining. All right, we're gonna flip over and do the other side. And again, we're just building up, making sure that we've got full coverage over that eye. You guys let me know. Obviously, we normally will only do a live stream for about an hour, and we're at that hour mark. If you want, we can stop here, and I can share, like I can tie one up and share out with everyone what it may look like, or actually, Jeff, why don't you tie it with that feather for the accent and show people what that looks like? Because I don't want to take up too much time of everyone's night. But, hopefully everyone had fun. Obviously, like I said, this was a little bit longer than some of the other ones that we've done. But the result, I think, is a very fun fly to tie. And, yeah, same here, Steve. Hopefully we can all get together and fish, sooner rather than later. It'd be something that'd be nice to do. So, Stu, take a look online on Amazon. the light is cheap. The light should only cost you about $10 at most. But the UV glue, depending upon the compound that you use, is going to be more expensive, but it can last a really long time. Like, I've been using this same bottle of UV thick for I don't know, it's been more than about a year and a half. Now, I'm not a commercial tyer, so I'm not tying 50 flies a night, but it's definitely tied up, I'd say, about that. Probably tied about 50 flies with it so far, and it's done me well. Oh, by the way, I'm using high gloss head cement. I talked about it before. Just dipping it on the bodkin and slowly making sure that I cover all of that UV glue that's still tacky. This gives a nice shine, a very durable finish, and eliminates all of that tackiness. So I don't have to worry about that fly being a little bit sticky until it fully cures. And making sure that I go all the way around the fly. And I'm trying to do this as evenly and quickly as possible, because this will start to set. Unlike UV glue, high gloss head cement sets with air. Once it's exposed to ambient air, it will start to set. And so you kind of need to do this all at once, or it'll start to look a little unfinished. Okay, so now that I have that in place, I'm going to go ahead and start rotating. My bodkin is dirty, so I always, in my desk, have some paper towels so I can come through and wipe that off, and I'll clean that and keep that in good shape. Because this stuff reacts to air, I cover that as soon as I can. And now I'm just rotating this fly. If you don't have the ability of rotating while this is starting to set, then the other thing that you can do is just take your fly and get it in more of a downward or an upward position. So if you just set your fly like this in your vise, what that's going to do is have that head, whatever head cement wants to run, it'll run down, which is fine because, again, our fly rides hook point down. And then it'll also run back, so it won't cover up the hook eye. For me, I like to have it in the vise and just kind of make sure that I'm kind of rotating around so that it sets and doesn't run. But it doesn't take long. After, a minute, then it's ready. And that's it. We're gonna stop here tonight. So this is what we tied. So it's a little bit different, very subtly different from tying a regular deceiver. But this one is going to sink this way. So when I fish it, I'll strip, pause, let it kind of flutter down, then give it a strip, and it'll dart up because I'm using a floating line usually. And then, strip, pause, and it'll again sink. And it's just imitating a fish that's kind of dying. And that can be really effective, especially right now with the water being so cold. If you go out to a pond or a still section of a river, you'll really be able to accentuate that pattern and fish it in that way. And again, this is also really good just to strip very quickly. It gives a really good bait fish imitation. So, I hope you guys had fun. I hope you guys learned a couple of things. Learned how to tie a classic pattern in a slightly different way to make it imitate more. By the way, if you tied this with blues and oranges, you could have a bluegill pattern very easily. Right, look at how tall this fly is, but how narrow it is, right? That's very panfish-like. Now, of course, once it gets in the water, it's going to thin down a good bit. Everything comes down, but it still has some volume and bulk to it. And the last thing, hopefully everyone's doing well. Feel free to reach out, leave comments in the chat if you guys have any questions, or reach out in other ways. And we'll see you next week. I don't think we know exactly what we're tying yet, so I can't give you a preview. But, you know, I think Jeff's cooking up something awesome for it. And so, all right. Well, take care. Have a good night. And until next week.